sometimes I may respond to it while speaking, or I'll just wait to the end of my session, then I respond to it. So today's session is titled, as we all know, Pitch Perfect. How to pitch PR stories to global media and journalists. Now, it's important, when I was approached to speak about this topic, I found it interesting because right now, as a public relations professional operating in any market in Africa, pitching to global publication, it's a much needed skill and requirement of your job, because especially if you're working with clients that offer their service across multiple markets, and also if you want to position your clients in a way that they are seen as a market leader, or they are seen if it's an individual brand, the CEO of or the C-suite executives of the client, you want to position them as thought leaders within the sector where they operate. So understanding how to pitch to the media, understanding the global media, as well as understanding how to pitch to journalists who write for global media, it's a very important skill, and I'm happy to be sharing today. So these are some of the secured, sample of secured coverage global media that we have worked and secured coverage for clients. And some of the things I'll be sharing today will be some practical experience of how we, when I say we, myself and the team I work within, go through to secure this coverage. So first and foremost, before we go into how to pitch to global media, it's important that we understand the different global media markets. It's very important that we understand this market and understand how this market function, because that understanding will help in a way that you approach the journalist, as well as the way that you pitch your story. So for the purpose of this session, I broke it down to 3 different markets, which is North American market, media market, the European media market, and the Asia Pacific media market. And the reason I focus on these 3 markets, because these are markets that I currently work in addition to some other markets, which the Latin and the Caribbean market, but that's not something that I work very strongly. These 3 markets are markets that I work in and I have experience in. And I believe these are markets, if you look at the African business and tech ecosystem, if you look at investments that are coming into the continent, if you look at investors coming into the continent, whether they're investing in tech startups or they're investing in other businesses, you see that they come from these markets. They either come from the US, or they come from Europe, from the UK, or they're coming from either China, or they're mostly coming from China. So it's important that you understand these 3 different markets and understand how these markets work. Now, the first being the North American market, I would say this market is mostly a transactional market, in the sense that once you have a great story and you're able to tick all the points that the reporter is looking for, or the media is looking to cover, the story they're looking to cover, they will do a story, they'll write a story, they'll cover your client or the product. They'll do a story on your client or the product. So for this market, you really, when I say transactional, I'm saying it from a place of, if a story, they do it based on merit. So if the story is great, they'll cover your organization or the product, irrespective of whether you have previous relationship with the journalist or not. That's for the North American market. So there are lots of publications in the North American market. You have the New York Times, you have the Wall Street Journal, all of these publications, for instance, once you've got a great story, a great narrative, you have the right data points, and you can answer some of the questions we're going to look at while we go deep into this session, you're going to secure coverage. For the UK market, for the European market, of course, we know that the UK is like the hub of the European market. And if you also think about it from a place of where investors are coming in, you would see that majority of the investors into the African market are coming in from UK. And the reason I'm using this context, I'm putting this in context, is because most of the clients you're working for and working with are either, most of the clients or organization you're working for and with are either based in Africa, whether in Nigeria or Kenya or Ghana, or they are international organizations that are trying to come into Africa, but still need global positioning. So that's why I decided to focus on these three markets, and I'm using the context of the relationship between these markets and Africa to bring it, to make the conversation more relevant for you. Now, when we look at the Asian market, this is a market that is fast growing in terms of interest from investors, as well as interest from whether they are traditional investors or they are impact investors. So if you look at China, beyond the fact that China as a country is investing in Africa, whether in Africa's infrastructure, China as a country and some of the Asian countries around, some of those countries in Asia also are beginning to invest in the tech, in the African tech ecosystem. If you also look at the Nigerian market and even the African market on a whole, you will see that a lot of the Chinese or the Asian products are coming into the market. So there is kind of a relationship that is, you know, that's existing. And at this point, I believe it's even being, it's being consolidated. So the Asian market is also another market that you need to really pay attention to when you're looking at international media and you're looking at securing coverage in these different markets. For the Asian market, one of the things I would say about this market is that a lot of the media around this market are owned and controlled by the government, right? So majority of the media in China, most of them, majority of them, especially the one with the most reach, are owned and controlled by the government. And that means there's a lot of censorship, and there are a lot of things that you cannot say when, you know, trying to pitch this publication. So, and what these Asian publications do, or these Asian media do, they, just like their European and their North American counterpart, they're beginning to create the African version of the Asian media. So if you see, there's this TV station called CNTG. I oftentimes mix it up, but it's an abbreviation for either China National Television for Africa or something. It's a Chinese media that is created for the African market. So we're going to look further into these global media and their African versions and how you can approach them. So I want to believe that I've been able to put this into context, and I also want to confirm that we're on the same page. So please, like I said, I'm looking at the chart here. So if you're with me and you're following me so far, please, can you just use the chat and let me know to continue? Just say right on or continue or go on. I just want to be sure that we are on the same page. Thank you. Thank you so much. All right, good. So going further, now that we understand these three different markets and we are looking at these three different markets, now let's go deeper into looking at understanding the global media. Now we understand the global media markets, but now let's look at the global media as a whole. Now, when we talk about global media, of course, what comes to mind would be the Financial Times, the Forbes, the Bloomberg, the CNN of the world, the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, and all the list goes on. So when you want to approach the global media, one of the things you need to look at will be what their editorial focus is. I believe this is something we already know, and this is something that we do when we work with national media, whether we work in Nigeria or we're working across different markets in Africa. One of the things you want to do is look at what their editorial focus is, as well as what their target audience is. You want to look at that, and that's really important. And why I say this is that, for instance, if you look at FT, which is Financial Times, you know that that's a business media, and not only general business, but business as it has to do with numbers, as it has to do with revenues, as it has to do with analytics behind, revenue, numbers, growth, statistics of the business, things that should, growth of the business in numbers, milestones. They want to see business milestones, mostly in numbers. So when you're approaching Financial Times, you should know that the story has to be something that appeals to the audience of the Financial Times. And who are this audience? The audience are business investors, business people sitting in New York or the UK, people that want to make financial decisions. They want to make financial decisions. So these are the audience. And so anything you want to pitch to this publication has to be something that speaks to this audience and addresses the editorial focus of the Financial Times. If you look at Forbes, for instance, Forbes as a publication, what their focus is on highlighting achievements, looking at stories of achievements, people who are the richest, people who have generated the most money, people who have companies that have hit a certain number in terms of milestones and all of that. That's what Forbes is looking at. So they are looking at Forbes stories are usually stories that are more, what I would say, motivational. That's not the exact word, but if you read a Forbes story, you will go out leaving that story thinking, this person has done it. This is great, what this person did. So the motivation behind it, why they're doing the business, they're not very heavy in going down to the details of the numbers and the statistics. Yes, they do it when they want to, they want to rate people in terms of how much that they have, but they are not very meticulous as compared to Financial Times. So for a Forbes story, something that has to do with prestige, that has to do with growth from a place of this is where we were, this is where we are now. Yesterday we were we're making this amount of money, but today we are these global international companies. I'm not saying that Forbes do not have other sections within them that focuses on specific topics, but if you look at it on a whole, anything you're writing around Forbes has to have these inspirational angle to it, something that has to do with the growth in terms of milestones. Now, the same thing applies to whether it's Bloomberg, whether it's CNN. You need to understand what the editorial focus and the target audience of these media platforms. Very important. Now, the next thing is understanding that most of these media platforms have African versions. So, for instance, Financial Times has Financial Times Africa. CNN, there's CNN Africa, there's Forbes Africa, there's Bloomberg Africa. Very few of them do not have African version. I don't think Wall Street Journal has an African version, but they then have African bureau chiefs, right? So when you're looking at the international and global media, look at them from the main global media that's probably stationed in New York or stationed in UK, then look at the African version. It doesn't mean most of the African version of this publication have offices in Africa, but not all of them. Why is this important? Why do we need to understand the difference and know the one we are targeting? The reason is that CNN International may not be interested in the story that you are bringing to it when the story is Africa focused, except the story is Africa focused on the global stage, something that impacts the entire world. Then you would see it oftentimes pop up on CNN International. And one of the things I need to say, if you look at CNN, what we watch here in Africa is not the same thing that the CNN International we watch here. It's not the same thing as what you will watch in the US, because they have different versions of it. So the ones that they're showing to us in Africa is usually a different version to the ones that the people in the US watch. Sometimes they can, cross-schedule and show what they're showing internationally. But one thing you should understand is when you're approaching this media, know that there is a section of the media that is targeting a particular market. So there's for Africa, and I'm focusing on Africa because we're in Africa, and I believe most of our clients will be either African clients or African-focused clients. So there is also CNN in Asia and different markets. So you need to understand that when approaching this global media, ask yourself, is this story relevant for the international audience, the global audience of CNN, or is relevant to the African audience of CNN? If it's relevant to the African audience of CNN, then of course you should know that your focus should be the African version of that publication. For instance, when you secure coverage on Forbes, it's not the same thing like when you secure coverage on Forbes Africa, because the audience reading Forbes International is not the same audience as the one reading Forbes Africa. Now, when we go out to pitch, depending on the story, sometimes we can decide to say, depending on the business objectives, and that's something obviously I need to mention. When you want to begin any media outreach, you need to answer the question, what's the business objective? Why do we want to approach this media? You need to start from the business objectives, the business goals, then you now walk backwards into what your PR and communication goals are. So that's important to state. And the reason I'm saying this is that would determine which of the versions of the global media you should go to. If, for instance, your business objective is to secure investment from investors in the UK and the US, you would be targeting Forbes International, or you'll be targeting FT International. But if your objective is to target African investors, or you want to just position yourself as thought leaders within your sector, then you want to go for Forbes Africa. So it's important that we pay attention to what our business objectives are, and then work backwards to now determine what our PR and communication goals are, and of course, what target media we're going to reach out to. Again, it's important to know that as much as you have this international media, you have the African media, you also have international freelance journalists. There are lots of journalists that write for these, for CNN, they write for Forbes, for Bloomberg. They are independent. Most of these journalists have either worked with this media in the past and maybe moved on to become freelance journalists, but they still have relationships and they have access to these publications so they can write for it. So when targeting the global media, you should, as much as you're looking at the reporters within this global media, you should also look at the freelance journalists that write for this global media, because you can also secure coverage with these freelance journalists if you pitch your story right to them, which is something we're going to be looking at as we go further in this training. Then, of course, there's the regional bureau and the country bureaus. So, for instance, FT has FT West Africa, and they have reporters that are writing for Nigeria, right? So if you want to target a reporter or someone who is an editor in charge of West Africa, your story has to be something, even though it's country-based, has to be something that speaks to the region. So for instance, if you're writing about your organization, and most times it's not that you don't always secure coverage about your organization alone. It's usually going to be about your industries and your sector and how your organization is playing within that sector. Now, if you're writing a story that has to do with your organization and you want to target the West African editor, you need that your story needs to be something that shows how it's relevant, not only for the market in Nigeria, but also relevant across other West African countries. There are exceptions to this, but oftentimes you should pitch a reporter or an editor in if your story is West African and you want it to be published by a West African editor. But if your story is Nigerian focused, then you want to go to the Nigerian reporter, the Nigerian correspondent for that publication. So the point I'm saying is, do not approach an editor or a correspondent who writes for UK for a particular publication for a Nigeria story. They're not going to look at it. Or what I'm also saying is that you stand a greater chance to get the interest of a Nigerian correspondent for FT to write about your story in Nigeria that has to do with Nigeria and the Nigerian business environment than you would when you approach a reporter that is writing for West Africa. I say there are exceptions to this, but you are more likely to secure coverage from an editor or someone who writes across West Africa when your stories show a connection between these countries within the region. The same thing applies to East Africa, the same thing applies to North Africa. So that's a prism you should be looking at this global media. I hope we're on track. Am I passing my points and are you getting it? Should I continue? Again, I'll be looking at the chat. Let me know if we're on the same page and I should keep on. So I'm just looking at the chat to be sure that you can hear me. Okay, good. I just want to be sure that I can be heard. Great. All right then. Now let's look at what global reporters want. What do global reporters want? Outside the fact that they want stories that speak to their region or speak to the market where they write, they love exclusives. Global reporters or global media or reporters for global publication love exclusive. By exclusive, it means you're going to pitch that story to them first and only them. And only them. They don't like to write stories that have been published in other publications or that you intend to pitch to other publications. They love exclusive. They love to be the one to break the story. Now, it makes sense to give them an exclusive and to secure coverage with them, because if you do, there's a trickling effect of you or your organization being covered by global media, because once they are covered, what then happens is that other regional or national media pick up the story and write about it because the global media has published it. So for instance, when we were working with a client that wanted to announce one of its funding rounds, we had the opportunity to say, let's go to, of course, we had to go to tech global media, and that's TechCrunch. You've got to give TechCrunch an exclusive and give them a scoop of the story, give them inside opportunities. I need to also state that global media are not really interested in your press release, and 80 to 90 or 95.9% of the time, they are not going to publish your press release, except you are sending this press release via the wire, okay? And you're paying for it. That's when they are most likely, your press release is going to be, republished the way you wrote it. Yes, you can go with press release to them, but they are not getting the press release because they want to publish the press release. They are getting the press release because they want to get information to now decide whether it's story that is relevant to their audience enough to either want to interview the CEO of the company, or interview customers, or interview other people and write a broader story about that's relevant to the industry. And that brings me to the second point. Global reporters like to write stories that are relevant to the industry, not necessarily your organization, because they're not really interested in writing about your organization. Because if they do, then that probably will be an advertorial, and they're not interested in doing that, except you are paying for that to happen. And I need to clarify, all of the things we're talking about here is about earned media. It's about you. It's not about any paid media. This is all about earned media. And the samples that I showed earlier at the beginning of this presentation, the sampled secured coverage, all of those were earned media. So this conversation is really from a place of providing a story that is relevant to the publication and to the reporter that they would want to write about it without you paying for it. So like I said, your story has to be relevant to the industry. So how do you get your story to be relevant to the industry? Yes, your organization is doing something. You've got to look at what your organization is doing and look at patterns across the industry, or look at the impact of what you're doing, or what your organization is doing or creating, or the product, how it's impacting the industry or the sector. Then you can pitch a reporter to write a story about the sector, and then can infuse your organization and what your organization is doing in that sector. That is how you are more likely to secure coverage with global publications. You're not going to secure coverage with them by just sending your press release and expecting that they will publish it and write about your organization. Everything in the header is going to be about your organization. It's not always the case. So when you think about exclusives, also think about how is this story relevant to the industry and the sector or the market. By the market, we are saying the market where the reporter is writing. So if it's Nigeria, or the region, if it's West Africa, if it's East Africa, you should be able to think, how is this story relevant to this market and to the industry? That's the only way you can pique the interest of the reporter and they would want to write about your organization. Another thing you need to pay attention to really is the relevance of the news cycle. You need to look at if the story is relevant to the news cycle. Or let me say it another way. Look at what the relevant news cycle is and leverage the news cycle, which is something I'll be speaking about further in this presentation. Look at the news cycle and leverage it, then tie your organization to it and show how the organization is relevant to that news cycle. Then you can tell your story or what you are doing, what your organization is doing. That's one of the tricks in securing the interest of reporters that write for global publication. And of course, this last point is really important. You've got to provide data and proof points. You've got to provide data and proof points. You can't make claims that you cannot back. So you can't say you are the fastest growing organization in Nigeria or in Africa if you do not have data to back it up. You can't say your product is the best product that is since the creation of aggregate bread and all of that without backing it up. The point here is this: every claim has got to be backed with data and statistics. You've got to back it up. You can't just make claims. And that's something that reporters that write for global publications really pay attention to. You can get away with it with national reporters or reporters that write in national publication or local publications or media, but you will not get away with it for when international publications are writing about you, especially when there are publications like the Financial Times or there are publications like the basically the Wall Street Journals or the Bloomberg. You've got to really, validate every claim that you make. So those are the things that are important for reporters that write for global publication. Are we good on this conversation, and can I continue? So like I say, just use the chat. So I just want to be sure that you can hear me and we're on the same page.
Yes, and if they have any concern, can they put it on the chat box?
Okay, great.
After the session, like I said, they have the chance to talk with you.
Okay, good. Thank you. All right.
Question and answer.
All right. Thank you. So moving on, also I would like to know, while I'm having this conversation, I also like to know if what I'm saying makes sense to you and it's putting things in perspective so that I know that I am providing value that is relevant to you. All right, good. So moving away from what global reporters want, let's now look at Pitch Perfect. I know the title is Pitch Perfect, but I decided to use Perfect Pitch. Now, the truth is there's really no such thing as perfect pitch or pitch perfect, because this is where the work really is. Now, you know the media, you know what they want, you've done your research, you have the media contact, you have the reporter's contact, and now you have your story. You understand everything from what the global publication want, what the reporter wants. You have a story that you think is relevant, and you will now want to reach out to the reporter. This is where the work really, really happens. And this is where you draft your pitch email. I would say that the success of your success, or what determines whether you secure coverage in a global media or not, is, in my own opinion, 80% dependent on your pitch email. 80% of time dependent on your pitch email. 20% of the time is the research you do to find out who to reach out to, but 80% of the time is your pitch email. And the process of pitching is not something that you just pitch once and they love the story and they just jump on it. So that's why I say there's really no such thing as perfect or perfect pitch. It's something that sometimes you've got to do multiple times to secure one coverage. And it's really worth it, because if you are able to secure an exclusive, going back to some of the examples I've given, when we secure exclusive with some of these global publications, all we just need to do is secure that exclusive. And the next thing you see, like different Pan-African and including other global publications pick up the story even without us reaching out to them. And that's because we've been able to secure exclusive with these global publications. Now let's go into the process of pitching. How do you go about pitching reporters? The first thing I would say, I think someone's mic is on again. The first thing that's important in pitching reporters is researching your pitch. And you see, this is where I say the work is. Yes, you want to draft an email. Most people think it's just to just draft an email and say, hi, XYZ, our organization is into this, and we create the best product. We're looking at covering our story. Thanks and best wishes. Most people think that's the work. No, that's not the work. Before you even draft the email, there's a lot of work that will happen. And what do? Research. First, you go and research. Let's say, for instance, you want to write about, let me use e-commerce. And I'm using that because one of our clients is in the e-commerce space. Let's say I want to write about, I want to pitch a story with a global publication on e-commerce. What I'll go do is go online, Google e-commerce. I want it to be on Financial Times, or I want it to be on Bloomberg. I'll go e-commerce, Bloomberg, Africa. So a story will pop up. It could be an e-commerce story. It could be someone that mentioned e-commerce, the reporter mentioned e-commerce, but I would then see the reporter that has written a story about e-commerce in Africa from Financial Times or Washington Post, or depending on the publication. I will read the story, what the person wrote about. I would also do further research and see what other reporters are writing about e-commerce in Africa. So you see, there's a lot of work there. I would want to understand what the ongoing conversation is. So I can give you for free, for instance, now the ongoing conversation in e-commerce is e-commerce for the mass market. E-commerce targeting people who do not have smartphones. That's the ongoing conversation when it has to do with e-commerce in Africa, as it were now. E-commerce for the middle to low income or the consumers that are living in rural areas. That's the conversation around e-commerce. So you see a lot of publication, or a lot of journalists writing about e-commerce for this audience, whether they talk about agent networks or they talk about challenges of distribution or logistics to this market because there are no roads or there are no good, there are no internet. All of those issues, I would understand that this is what everybody is talking about in this sector as it has to do with e-commerce. So I now understand what angle I would approach a reporter, especially if my company or the client or the organization I work with is in the e-commerce sector. I know that this is the conversation and this is the angle I would begin to go for. So like I said, you want to research, you want to have the data, and data, you want to have data like 800 million. I'm using on the e-commerce sector because that's the sector I currently work with a client in, and I have some of this data in my head. So 800 million Africans, out of the 1.2 billion Africans, 800 of them are in the middle to low income consumer categories. 800 million. So that shows that there's a mass market opportunity for e-commerce startups. However, there are challenges in addressing this market. What are these challenges? No address, no infrastructure, lights. They don't have internet. They have bad roads. So taking products to them is a challenge. So understanding this market and having these data points, it's important for your pitch. Of course, you also need to have reference materials. Reference materials could be a report written about the e-commerce ecosystem in Africa, or a prediction by the World Economic Forum or by the African Development Bank, speaking about the e-commerce sector. So you need to have reference materials. And of course, you need to understand the trends. You need to have contact information. Contact information is what I said earlier, having the details of the reporter, educate yourself, and also see what the competitors are doing. See what competitors are doing. So in the case of the e-commerce sector, you would see that a certain competitor is doing this or is targeting this. Let me give you an example. So using the e-commerce ecosystem, there are some e-commerce players that are focusing on consumers in urban areas. So Lagos, Abuja, Port Harcourt, Nairobi, Joburg. Now there are e-commerce players that are focused on customers in rural areas. So in Nigeria, we're looking at people in very rural areas. I don't want to mention a particular area, so someone will not take it personal. But the point here is that once you see that competitors are doing something different, you can then pitch your story from a different angle and say things like, this is what competitors are doing, this is the challenge they are facing, but this is what we are doing, and this is how we are changing, we are leapfrogging the industry, or we are creating a revolution in the e-commerce sector that is targeting the mass market. Hello? I think somebody is...
People will do this meeting now. We are up to 100.
Mute everybody now.
Okay. All right. So
don't mute the speaker. You've muted the guest speaker.
Thank you. So research is really important when you want to draft your pitch. So before you even draft your email, before you even start drafting your email, there's a whole lot of work that you've done, researching, understanding the market, getting data points, getting reference materials, looking at what that reporter has written before, looking at trends, educating yourself about the industry, looking at what competitors are doing before you now sit down and start drafting your email, your pitch email, which I say, like I said, determines 80% of the time whether you secure the interest of the reporter or not. Now, are we good with this phase? Can I move on to the next phase?
Yes, please.
Okay, great. So the next phase is really how you structure your pitch. You see, we are paying a lot of attention in the pitch because this is where the work is. This is where the main work is. How do you structure your pitch? As little, it's not little, but let me say as basic as your email subject is very important in your pitch email. How you caption your email will determine whether the reporter opens the email or not. Because these guys receive tons of emails across different markets, depending on the market that they're operating in. So you need to have a very powerful email subject that catches their interest in a very compelling way. So for instance, again, using the e-commerce sector, if I were to pitch an email, pitch a reporter, and I want to pitch, let's say I want to pitch the story of growth. I want to pitch their growth stories to an international publication. What I would say is, I may not even use the name of the company. I may say how Kenyan, because this is a Kenyan company, so I can say how Kenyan e-commerce startup is revolutionizing the e-commerce sector in Africa using agent network. That, in a way, it seems like a long subject. Again, I can make that shorter, but the point I'm saying here is your email subject has got to be compelling, something that someone wants to read and say, this is a great story. Let me listen to it. Or you can say how e-commerce startup is empowering 81% of African women through XYZ, XXS. You want your subject to really be compelling so that someone is going to open it and read. That's the first thing. Now, let's look at the body of the pitch. Body of your pitch. How do you start your pitch? You need to look at context. You need to give the reporter context. Why is this important? For instance, if you are pitching if you're pitching the African editor for Bloomberg or Financial Times, the African editor may or may not be in Africa. Some of the times they most times are in the UK or in the US. That means they don't have context of the market, of your specific market. Yes, they're African editor, but there's no way they would understand the market as yourself that is in the market. So when you want to pitch, it's important to put things in context, give them a background, and give them perspective to what the story is about. For instance, if I want to pitch a Bloomberg, the story of the e-commerce startup in Africa that is empowering, that is creating e-commerce solution for African mass market, and I want to pitch a reporter that is based in the UK or in the US, I would give them a context and say things like, when you think about, this is my email, hi XYZ, when you think about e-commerce, when you think about e-commerce in Africa, most people think about the Amazon style e-commerce that has been replicated by most startups. However, a huge percentage of the African population have been underserved because they live in rural areas. And this is what XYZ is trying to solve. This is the solution XYZ is bringing to this audience. So what I've done there is that I've given the reporter context. I put the Amazon style e-commerce, which the Jumias and the Kongas are doing, the Amazon style. Then I give him the other side of it. So there's the Amazon style that is targeting people in Lagos, Nairobi, Joburg, but there's the other side of it. There's the other side of consumers that have been underserved and therefore have not been given access to e-commerce. However, this e-commerce that we're working with is providing e-commerce for these underserved markets. What I've done there, like I said, is provide context and help the reporter understand the story. So I'm already planting the seed of the story for that reporter. Like I said, the reporter would write the story when it addresses the sector. So that reporter will now be looking at the story around the African e-commerce sector and now focus on e-commerce for the mass market. Then he will write about e-commerce for the mass market using some of the data you have provided. 800 million consumers are underserved out of the 1.2 billion. Then you provide data about lack of internet, data about lack of access to roads, so there is last mile logistic problems. We provide all of those information. The reporter will write a story about the e-commerce for that sector, but in that story, they will now say, however, this e-commerce startup is providing solution. And they now go into the story of how you guys are doing, how you guys are providing e-commerce solution for this market. But the point is they are writing about the sector, and they now drill it down to how your startup or the startup you're working with is providing solution. And then that's where you now come into the story and you are part of the bigger story. So you see, the reporter will not write about your startup. They will write about the sector or a particular segment of the sector, and then show how your startup is providing solutions in that market. So you need to provide context. Again, you need to show, and all of this has to be in your email, you need to show the problem and the solution. What is the problem? The problem is 800 million Africans have been excluded from the e-commerce, from the benefit and convenience that e-commerce brings as a result of bam, 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 bam. This is the problem. Lack of internet, lack of access to good roads, logistic problem, bam, bam, bam. Then the next thing is the solution. That is where your startup comes in. That is where the main story comes in. And you show how your startup is providing solution. That's how you now infuse your story in the pitch. Then I would like to say in your pitch email, always round up by offering an opportunity, either attaching the press release. Again, I say your press release will not be something they will pick and publish, but it's something that will provide them context. Most times they don't need press release to get that exclusive. Majority of the time you don't need it, but oftentimes you need it. So it's just something that you use to provide context. Then offer them an opportunity to speak to the CEO of your company, or to speak to the consumers, or to speak to, in the case of this e-commerce startup, they empower a lot of women who are agents. So you can give them opportunity to speak to this agent. And this is something that we did, and we secured coverage in Forbes. And in trying to write about the industry and the sector, we're able to now secure coverage for the organization and the impact they are creating. So it's important that you really pay attention to the structure of your pitch mail, because that to a great extent will determine if you secure the interest of the reporter or not. Now, I was trying to really put together a sample pitch to give you an idea, but because of, I was trying to do that because of time, but I just put this here to put things in perspective for you. And that's, if you see here, is really enjoyed your latest article. Again, you've got to show that you've done your research. So if you did research and you've written, and you see that reporter has written about a subject, put it out there and say, hi, John, I read your recent article on XYZ on the e-commerce ecosystem, and I really enjoyed it. And I think that you have got a great follow-up article or follow-up story for you to consider. So reporters are looking for stories. I need to always say, I need to say this. They are looking for stories to write about. So if you become a resource by saying, I read this article and there is a great follow-up story that you can provide even another perspective to what they are written, they will be willing to write about it. Let's say they are written about the e-commerce sector in Africa, and they wrote about e-commerce that's targeting the people in Lagos, Port Harcourt, Abuja, and top cities in Africa. You can say, hi, John, great article on e-commerce in Africa and how it's developing. And you can even say there were 3 points, I picked 2 points, show that you actually read the story. That means you have to read the story. So you will now say, there's this quote that you mentioned, e-commerce in Africa, e-commerce has just begun in Africa and will grow in the next 10 years. So I think that I've got a great follow-up article or follow-up story to this, and this speaks to e-commerce for the underserved markets of African consumer. Then you now bring your data and say 800 million Africans out of the 1.2 billion Africa, 800 of them live in middle to low income consumers, and majority of them stay in rural areas, and as a result, do not have the luxury to access e-commerce like the people staying in cities, Lagos and Abuja and all of that. However, in addressing this issue, XYZ, which launched in XYZ, is providing e-commerce solution for this market using this, and this. Again, you've got to show proof points. You've got to show how they're doing it. So this is just a brief of how your pitch email can go. But if I had more time, I'll probably have gone deeper into this. But I hope this really puts things in perspective. And I would like to be rounding up here. I think I'm already how many more minutes do I have, please? I think I'm already beyond time. But when it comes to how many more minutes do I have, please?
Yeah, 10 more minutes.
Okay, great. That's 10 more minutes. Great.
Okay.
Okay, good. So what PR professionals to do, right? So when you want to reach these guys, think about the media audience. Think about, which is something I've spoken about earlier. Think about their audience. Think about who is going to be reading the publication, because the media exists for their audience. This is something we know, but this is something that needs to be further emphasized when you want to pitch global media. Then you need to answer the question, why should we care? Why should they care? You need to be able to answer that question. Because the fact that your organization is doing, just launched a new product, or your organization just expanded to a new market, does not mean they should care. It doesn't mean, the fact that you have news does not mean it's news to the global media. So you need to be able to answer, why should they care? Oftentimes they would care if it shows how what you launch, your product or your service, has impact across sectors or across markets, or it's impacting a lot of people, or it's new, it's innovative, it's something that is fresh, it's a different angle to what is already in existence. So you need to be able to answer that question, why should they care? Another thing I like to say is always think about story mining and think about different angles. Sometimes when you are operating in your sector, you need to think beyond your sector. If you're in the e-commerce, think beyond e-commerce. Think about logistics. Think about other sectors that facilitate your sector. So there's logistics, there is payment. So fintech, financial inclusion is part of the conversation for you. Then when you think about financial inclusion, you'll be thinking about things like how your organization or how your e-commerce platform is enabling financial inclusion. So you can lead your pitch with the conversation around financial inclusion. Then go walk backwards and then add your story. You can lead your pitch with a conversation around logistics and last mile logistic challenges. Then walk backwards and then talk about your e-commerce and what you're doing. So you don't always need to lead with what you guys are doing. You can lead with other sectors or other industries that are connected to your own industry. Lead with that area and show a connecting point between what they are doing and what you guys are doing, and how that is relevant to their audience and why they should care. You should be able to think about multiple story angles. Sometimes you can get stories by thinking about the impact that you're creating, the impact that your organization is creating. So sometimes some media might not be interested in telling your story about how you guys have made profit, how you guys have grown. But if you go from the angle of the fact that 81% of your agents are women, and these women create jobs in their local community, and as a result of that are able to send their children to school, they're able to pay for their, for their personal needs, and they live a life that is a bit better because they are agents. So that is a story angle that's focusing on impact on women and how it's creating jobs and how it's contributing to the community and by extension to the local environment and the economy of the nation. you can lead from that angle. Then in doing that, you cannot infuse how you guys are doing it, what you guys are doing. But you see, you started with leading with the impact on women. So you don't always need to go to these guys with what you guys are doing. You can think deeply and bring up an angle that you can lead with, then go further to talk about what you guys are doing. So again, think about it from a B2B and B2C perspective. B2B stories will have to do with growth stories. Think about it from an investor perspective. Again, what your business objectives are will determine how you tell the story. The B2C perspective will be human angle, human interest, how you are empowering people, how you are improving the quality of lives of people. And so you need to think about it from two different angles as well. The B2B from a place of business growth, numbers, key milestones, or you think about it from a B2C perspective, how you're contributing and improving the quality of lives of your consumers or the market, as it were. So I've spoken to most of this stuff. You need to anticipate coverage opportunities, and that's something that I'll speak about in the next slide, rounding up already. Yes, the next slide. Anticipate story opportunities. So look at notable news cycles and events, things around the United Nations General Assembly. Once there's an event around the United Nations, which happens in September in New York, begin to anticipate, because during that event, there's a whole lot of conversations that happen. Conversations around the SDG, Sustainable Development Goals, women impact, employment, empowerment, technology. If you look at it, you would see that your organization fits in one angle, one of those SDGs. Then pick it and look for a reporter that writes about that and pitch. The fact that if you are able to pitch it and align it to the United Nations General Assembly, the reporter is more likely to write about the story because that's the news cycle, that's the period. So if for instance, it's happening and you pick an SDG, which is women empowerment. I'm using that because the example that we use often, looking at the e-commerce startup that we work with, and you now see
3 more minutes. Sorry.
Yeah, thank you. I'm rounding up already.
3 more minutes. Yes.
Okay. So if you look at it around women empowerment, and you say something like, considering the current hunger that is ongoing, women empowerment and the SDG is one of the goals, one of the conversations that are being spoken about by world leaders and industry leaders. Then you now infuse the fact that your organization is empowering women, and this is how you're doing it. Of course, show data, show proof point, and that's something that you can secure the interest of the reporter within that news cycle. Again, there is the World Economic Forum and there's global observances that you can also leverage. We're in the month of March, so there's International Women's Day, which is 8th of March, then International Women's Month. The month of March itself is International Women's Month. If you pitch a reporter around international women and show how your startup is empowering women, then you can secure the interest because that's the news cycle. There's Black History Month, there's Africa Day. Then of course, you can also leverage industry reports and prediction to pitch reporters. But what I've done is me trying to compress a whole lot of knowledge in 45 minutes or 1 hour. I hope this has really been valuable to you. I hope this has added value to you in the past couple of minutes I've been speaking. And thank you so much for giving me your time, and I'm open to questions. Thank you.
Excellent, excellent. Oh, can we unmute and give David a round of applause, please?
Thank you.
Thank you, David.
Thank you.
Thank you, David.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you, Dave. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, David.
I think we can just take maybe 4 questions. And we'll do that through a raise of hand, and we'll pick, and then the questions. Would you want to take it question you answer, or you want all the questions and then you take the answers?
I think question I answer so I don't forget any of them.
Okay, so let's go. Please, with the raise of hand. Yes. Yes. And the fourth one, I see Bashar Abdi Mohammed.
Yes.
Can you take the floor first?
Okay, thank you very much, my chairman. I want to start by commending the speaker. In fact, you have imparted knowledge to us. I really appreciate what you have discussed, and I have gained a lot. My question is this: if I want to paint, and then in order to enhance the image of my organization outside the country, and this my question incorporates the B2B and the B2C.
Mhm.
Is it necessary for me while pitching to consider the cultural issue of that particular region? That is my only question. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And David?
Yes. So yes, I would say yes to that. It's important that you consider the cultural peculiarities of the region, because you remember when I say when I was giving an analysis at the beginning and I talked about the different markets, I talked about Asia, for instance. An Asia media market, mostly it's owned by the government. So you need to really consider the culture of that market. Again, this applies not only to global media, but even to Pan-African media. The way you pitch to South Africa is different from the way you pitch to East Africa. It's even in East Africa, the way you pitch to Ugandan public media is slightly different to how you pitch to the Kenyan media. So I would say yes to that. It's important that you consider the culture of the market that you're pitching to.
Thank you. Thank you. I hope it's understood. Chibweze Igwe, you have attention. Hello, are you there?
Yeah, thank you, ma. Thank you, Chairman. Dev, thank you so much. I must commend you. This is very enriching. I've benefited much from it. And I have said earlier, the timing and the fixing of this Zoom meeting is strategic and is also a nice pitching, as most of us are not around. Thank you so much, Esco, for choosing it to be Zoom. Dev, my question is, what's the effect of international politics when it comes to right pitching in PR? For example, when one is pitching, do you deliberately obliterate facts? Do you, in order not to enter issues of murky waters of international politics? For what we have been told now is the CNN and some media houses deliberately avoid anything that can tarnish the image of the nations. Do you say things as they are, or do you write your story and pitch accurately, or do you consider all of this? Thank you so much.
Well, in responding to that, I would say that's a consideration irrespective of which publication of media, whether local, regional, Pan-African, and global. You've got to really, I wouldn't say you get yourself involved in politics, because that can be a very volatile topic. You need to stay, again, think about it from a place of you're telling a story, and what story do you want to tell, and how does this story serve your business objectives? So there are certain information that doesn't necessarily serve your business objective, even though they are facts. If it doesn't serve your business objective, then I would say do not include it. So tell a story in a way that will get the interest of the reporter. So if you know that including politics will make them not to write about it, then stay away from it. but tell the story. I think what should determine how you pitch should be what your business objectives are. That's the determining factor. What is your business objective at the end of the day? If it's to raise awareness, if it's to steer a conversation, then you'll be considering an op-ed. If it's to position your organization as a leading company, or you want to position the CEO as a thought leader within the sector, then all of those objectives will determine how you tell your story, who you pitch, and what you say in your pitch.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. And the last, I guess, Mr. Yemi Smith.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Thank you, David, so much. Hope you can hear me.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Having done your research and making reference to a write-up by a reporter, is it conventional to point out an error while pitching to that person? Will the reporter feel offended, or is it acceptable in trying to push, I mean, make your pitch?
So what I would say to that is, you use it as, if you say point out an error, then I don't think we should approach it that way. I think you should say straighten the facts. So
okay,
instead of pointing out
things in the right perspective.
Correct. That's a better approach to it. So if for instance, the reporter said 15% of XYZ is this, and you have the facts, correct fact, you can say great article about this and this, and you know, in your article you mentioned 15% of this. However, based on recent studies or recent research, this is the most recent and most updated fact, and it's 25%. And then again, the question is, does it help your storytelling? Does it help your storytelling? If it does, then go ahead and do it. If it doesn't, then there's no need to do it. And if you must do it, do not do it from a place of pointing an error, but do it from a place of providing even a more, you know, straighten the fact, or providing a different and a more updated perspective. There's a way you put it that still passes your point without necessarily making it look like you were wrong. Because if you start on that note of, hey, I read your article, you were wrong, I don't think that's a great place to start.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Anyway, before answering the question, I don't know if Tolulope Ogundero is still here. Oh, Prof, I didn't see your hand.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Can we just have you briefly, because we're about
yes. Thank you. Thank you. I want to appreciate David for an excellent presentation. For those of us from the classroom, we need also to catch up with what industry is doing. But there's a branch of public relations that we teach, well, which is what we call media relations. Will David do us some kind of favor by relating what he has presented to that traditional function of public relations, which is media relations. I quite connected with him, but for the purpose of those who may just be beginner or learner public relations professional, can he relate what he has done to that core concept of media relations? Thank you. Did you hear me?
Yes, I did. Can you rephrase it again? I missed out.
Okay. What you have presented is an area of practice that we call media relations in public relations. Please, could you relate this well for the purpose of beginner public relations professionals, how this connect with media relations? Thank you.
Great. Yes, and by the way, I also do classrooms. So I love teaching, so I am very excited to be answering that question. So Yes, so this is, like you rightly pointed, this aspect is a component of media relations, which in itself is a component of public relations and a very, very important component at that. Even though I would like
you are muted, David. David, you are muted.
Yeah, we'll soon put him on.
Okay.
Yes, David, go ahead.
Okay, good. So, did you hear anything I said?
Yes, I heard. Yes.
Okay, good. So I say most times PR professionals are usually seen by clients or organizations as mostly media relations personnel. So yes, this is an aspect of media relations, which is a very important part of this is an aspect of public relations, which is a very important part of the practice. I would say that it's important, but definitely not everything that a public relations practitioner does that I'm sure that a lot of us on this call know. So one of the things I would like to add to that is, in addition to having these skills in media relations, it's important that as PR professionals, we also learn to create stories for organizations, for our clients and organizations beyond the press releases and beyond the press announcement. So we need to do a lot of story mining, because that story mining is what is going to give us different story angles that we can use to pitch media, whether local, regional, or global.
Thank you so much for all the answers. Tolulope, please, can you do a brief vote of thanks to David? And while doing so, may I acknowledge the esteemed presence of our council members who are here with us. Nkechi Ali Balogun, we welcome you. Thelma Oko, Shina Top. Acknowledge the presence of
Thank you, my chairman.
fellows of the Institute. Thank you, sir. We are happy that you joined us. All the fellows of the Institute, we're happy you are with us. And all our distinguished members, we are happy that we are always ready. And council member,
Yeah, just
your
one
hand
second.
is up.
Yes, 1 second.
Okay.
Good evening, everyone. All the council members, all the fellows, all the professional colleagues. I had to say something. I wanted David to know that I am here. And yes, and I also wanted to let him know that I'm highly impressed. We have a common friend. I'm talking to her this evening. I'll let her know that you were here giving us all the nuggets when it comes to pitching for international media. Thank you very much. You have never failed. You've always been able to impress me. Thank you. And we want to see more of you in our events.
Thank you so much. I appreciate, I'm really grateful for this opportunity. Thank you so much.
You see, you're having too many votes of thanks already. Is Tolulope there?
Yes, I am, Madam Chairman.
Yes, please. Say a word to David before I give him an online gift.
So